Hey guys, Jake Carlson here, host of the Modern Leadership Podcast. Are you ready to focus on amplifying your leadership superpowers? Let's go! Hello and welcome, fellow elite achievers. How you doing today? It is so great to be back on the podcast this week. It is something I look forward to every week. And why not? I get to sit and chat with some of the most incredible leaders, entrepreneurs, and authors. Great people changing the world. Today's guest, Steve Shallenberger, just released his new book, The Transformation Challenge, a new approach to winning in business and in life. After 4 years of deep dive research into over 50 different organizations, he found that not a single one had a common change management or problem-solving solution. So, being the problem solver he is, Steve set out to find a way to help teams transform any challenge into an opportunity, which resulted in his 6-step approach, which we want to talk about today. Raised in the Bay Area, California, he holds degrees from both BYU and Harvard Business School. By the way, shout out to my alma mater, go Cougars. He has founded, bought, and successfully run 11 companies in 4 different industries. And in addition to the Transformation Challenge, he is also the national best-selling author of Becoming Your Best, the 12 Principles of Highly Successful Leaders, which is dedicated to helping individuals and organizations become their best. Steve, it is so great to have you with us. How are you today?
Oh, so good, Jake. It is a delight to be on your show. What a privilege. What an honor.
And Steve, I got to be honest with you. The hardest part of this episode of the podcast was condensing your bio down to something that is just short enough for me to tell the podcast listeners, you have a tremendous background, have done so many things. What did I leave out from that short bio that certainly didn't give justice to all you've done?
Well, I'm sure it was way too long in the first place, but having said that, some of maybe the most important is the fact I have a wonderful wife. We've been married 44 years this year, 6 children, and the 19th grandchild is on the way.
And if you would have known how great grandchildren were, you would have skipped having kids, right?
They're pretty cool.
Well, one of the things that I think is so neat, this new book that you have, The Transformation Challenge, and we'll get into it a little later, but I just want to mention here at the beginning, you co-wrote this with one of your kids, which I think is kind of neat. How was that experience?
Really terrific. I've had it's really fun working with children, especially when you're focused on the same type of things. Rob, our oldest son, we had 5 boys and then a girl, finally, the princess, of course. But Rob had his dream. His aspiration was to be a fighter pilot, an F-16 fighter pilot in the United States Air Force, which he was able to do. And this gave him a tremendous background and an experience in leadership as well. As you can imagine, the Air Force is no nonsense, and they just can't afford really to have mistakes. And so they're really quite meticulous on how they approach things. So what in this book, The Transformation Challenge, we did the research, found what was happening in organizations that they didn't have a common approach to problem solving, which really kind of blew us away. And we decided to take our respective backgrounds and provide a solution, some steps, a process that I'd used that has played a very key role in taking any problem, combining that with Rob's experience, and voila, that's what we have. It was very helpful. We sat down as we thought about the book and said, okay, we know it's going to have 6 steps. It's going to have an introduction. So which one do you want to take, Rob? Which parts?
Now, do you guys live in a similar area, or were you doing this virtually?
He lives just about 30 minutes away, but we have the chance to see each other frequently. So in the office 2 or 3 times a week. And so we just took our respective assignments in the book and went to work. It requires, of course, really good communication. When we finished, we would review each other's work, but it was actually a lot of fun. And surprisingly, we are pretty aligned about where we are going. So this, in contrast to writing Becoming Your Best, which was based on 40 years of research that I did, that was much more difficult, took a much longer period of time. So in answer to your question, Jake, it was a fun one to do together with Rob.
Well, and I look forward to doing some of these things with my kids. As I've looked at, they're still young, and my oldest is 12. We went the opposite of you. We had two girls and then finished up with a third, our little boy, our little prince, I guess you would say. But I look at some of the opportunities that we can have, as a family in business and in life. And I think what's neat is you take his perspective and his background with the military and you marry it with this over 40 years of business building, buying, founding experience that you have. And I bet you got some great perspectives in these 6 steps, which I want to get to in just a minute. But before we do, I got to ask you the question that's burning on my mind. You just said that you've been married now 44 years. Did I get that number right?
Yep, in August it'll be 44.
The question that I got to ask you now, 44 years, how does marriage really compare to running a business?
Well, that's a great question, Jake. That's a good entree, actually, into the first major book that I wrote, Becoming Your Best, the 12 Principles of Highly Successful Leaders. I mentioned it was based on 40 years of research. And some of my early companies, when I was pretty young, 26, 27, and had several hundred employees, and particularly the sales reps would come and say, how can I be among the very top producing people here in the company? Or a manager might come and say, how can I be the best manager? And this really initiated within me a desire to know the answer. And so I began a research that I thought would take a few years, but it took much longer. And what I was looking for in this research is what set apart the high-producing individuals, high-producing organization, high-performing organizations from all the rest. And so I interviewed over 150 CEOs, studied the lives of hundreds of historical figures that have touched our lives, all of our lives. And what we discovered is that even though these people weren't necessarily perfect, all of them were doing at least 12 things in common. And that's what I put in the book, the 12 Principles of Highly Successful Leaders. And so these are things that people can learn to do that creates excellence. It's just like the law of gravity. I mean, it's 100%. These are behavioral principles that are just as predictable. And so in answer to your question, there's a lot of things that are very similar to running an organization, a team, a classroom, whatever it might be, as in marriage. So for example, I'll just give you an example of a couple of these 12 principles.
Yeah, that sounds great.
One of those is to live the golden rule in business and in life. So this is imperative as an organizational leader, a business leader, because if you don't really show respect, if you don't treat people well, they will get back. And it's really difficult to create a culture that is vibrant and alive where they want to be the best in the industry and across the board and have it be sustainable. So living the golden rule is essential in building healthy organizations. Well, that's also essential in having a healthy relationship in a marriage or a partnership or with your children, whatever. So once we start treating people with respect, it's a big game changer. Another one is to highly successful leaders. One of the very first things they do is that they lead with a vision that's inspiring, a vision that is full of purpose and meaning. And so when people in an organization have this, and we see this all over with excellent organizations, I know you have, Jake.
Absolutely.
Anywhere around the world, they have an inspiring vision.
Yeah, what's the difference between a vision and a mission as we dive down into this? And I want the audience to understand that there's a difference between having just a 2-sentence catchy, hey, this is what we do, and what the vision of an organization is.
Okay, that's great. Good question. I was in Istanbul at a global leadership conference, and the president of Coca-Cola and also the president of Mercedes-Benz was there. And we brought in some of the best around the world. And there were a lot of CEOs, a couple of thousand CEOs there. And so as the president of Coca-Cola started off, he said, I don't believe in mission statements. I mean, for heaven's sakes, Stephen Covey was on my board for 17 years, and I was on his board for 5 and ran some of their groups. Like, I about passed out right on the spot. And I thought, what? And then I didn't say much, but I was just trying to understand. And then later, on comes the president of Mercedes-Benz. He said almost the same thing. He said, I really don't believe in a mission statement. He says, so often it ends up as a kind of a plaque on the wall and people really don't understand it. Well, then the president of Coca-Cola said, but I'll tell you what my vision is. He says, my vision is twofold. One is to double the revenues for Coca-Cola over the next 10 years. And I thought, okay, that's a big one. And number 2 is to help provide clean water for every person on the face of the earth. And then he went on to talk about it. Well, the Mercedes-Benz president comes on a little later, talks about his vision. And then I realized we need to get way past semantics. And whether it's a vision statement, a mission statement, a purpose statement, we need to, this is the first thing a leader does, is sets the course, the direction. And generally in larger organizations, it's better with fewer words. Like Ritz-Carlton, ladies and gentlemen, serving ladies and gentlemen. Wow, that is big time. So we've made a Disneyland as the happiest place on earth. So these really drive the behavior, and this is what a great vision statement, or you may call it other things, but people get it. And a vision, a really effective vision, provides leadership in the absence of supervision. And that's what you want with your employees.
Yeah, and I want to take it back 1 second and ask you about how a vision plays into marriage. We started with this question about the similarities, and I absolutely believe and buy in what you're saying. I just want to hear you talk about how a vision translates into marriage as well as business.
That's exactly where I was going next.
Very nice. We're on the same page here, Steve. That's what going to the same school does for us.
Well, and so just like in an organization or a team, so for all of our leaders, and you have, elite achievers out there, this is what they want to be asking. Have I created a clear vision in my organization at whatever level I'm serving at? So for example, we held a 2-day breakthrough leadership conference, and the controller for a very successful organization, one of the best in its industries, attended. The first thing he did when he went back is created a vision statement together with his team for the control services of that organization. It happened to be in harmony with the bigger one. Now, just like we do that, we should do it. Whether we're a coach or a teacher for a classroom, what's the vision? We should do that for our own families. Each listener should have their own personal one, and there's a big difference between a vision and goals. The vision points the direction. It's meaningful. It should get you excited. Annual goals are what you're going to do this year to make that vision a reality. Well, just like we should have one personally that's inspiring that when we wake up in the morning, it gets us pumped up, we should have one as a partnership and as a family. Just think about it. Is our family any less important? Maybe just the way opposite is true than a business unit?
The opposite. I think it's more important. It starts the foundation. I mean, if you can't lead in your home and in your family, how do you expect to go and lead other people? Now, I understand that some people's family makeup and circumstances is different, such that leading may be different. But being able to lead in your personal life translates into the ability to lead and influence in your professional life.
So right, Jake. I mean, you're spot on that. And think about it in the marriage. Partners are so different. Men and women have differences. And so to be able to really talk about this and say, we are united in this. Yes, we agree. This is the direction we're going. Answers so many questions. And especially like in families that are second families where maybe there's been a divorce or a death in a partner, and so they get married again. It's all the more important, like you said, Jake, where there's more people involved. And when our family was young, we sat down on a Sunday or Monday evening one time in a family gathering, and I said, we are going to form a family vision. So we'd like to have each of you children write down some words that describe our family, that are important for our family. And we took these words in, and I kind of created a draft that put our wordsmithed it with their words and got it back to them. And these are children that are from like 7 to 16 at the time. And they're smart. The 7-year-old is smart, right?
Oh, absolutely.
They've got something to say here.
And I think sometimes we underestimate their thinking capacity, their ability to reason and to know what's going on. I mean, I think sometimes they surprise us. Often my kids surprise me with how much they know and understand what's going on and see the vision.
That's right. Don't sell them short.
That's right.
Well, and so that is how we created the Shallenberger family vision. And it is something we all understood. And it helped really affect the behavior of our children. And we've been fortunate. They're all married. They're all growing up. They're having their own families. And now they're doing the very same thing. So these principles we're talking about, once established, are intergenerational and provide an enormous light for people we don't even know yet. And that's the impact of a leader in an organization. By practicing these things, you understand it. You say, okay, these are what great leaders do. And as you start practicing them, you start seeing some pretty spectacular results.
Absolutely. This is fascinating conversation, and I'd hate to shift gears, but we want to talk a little bit about this new book that you have, The Transformation Challenge, and I want to dive in a little bit and talk about these 6 steps that you basically said, look, Rob, we're going to sit down, we're going to write this book together, and these are the 6 steps, a beginning and intro. What do you want to talk about? Let's talk about these 6 steps.
Okay, now before we do, Jake, you're so wonderful. I do want our listeners today, your listeners, and I understand they're amazing, and I love the purpose of what you're doing, of taking modern leadership and helping raise the bar here. So congratulations on all the things you're doing, Jake.
Thank you very much.
Okay, now, just so you know, we're plenty human. When our family did this vision statement together, part of it is we don't spit on each other and we don't scare each other. Because we had one son that would stand behind the wall, and when people would walk into the room, he'd jump out in front of them and scare them. And so we had a lot of fun with that, but it's still in there. Don't spit. We don't spit on one another.
Hey, I'm going to put both of those into my family vision because I think we have one son and we need to work on that.
I was going to say, you're probably pretty safe with those 2 girls.
Safe with the girls, working on the boy.
All right, back to the Transformation Challenge. Sorry to get off the beat.
Oh, that's what we do here.
So these are pretty tested. We have been using them with clients, and so I'd like to assure your listeners and invite your listeners to think of the biggest, baddest issues, the most challenging issues, the things that are looming large in their life, that kind of take up their times. Maybe it wakes them up at night. So that you actually have a target of how you can apply these 6 steps. And so here they are, pretty plain and simple. The first one is, step 1 is, what is the vision? And it's really helpful to just take a second on this, because most people, it's been, and you've probably seen this, Jake, but it's been my experience, start with the problem when they have a problem. But that's exactly the wrong place to start. And the reason is a problem frequently is already divisive. It frequently already weighs people down. It can be discouraging to them, full of emotion, and it's not done in the context of the bigger picture. So the minute we take the problem to what is the vision, what are we trying to accomplish here in the first place, it starts changing everything immediately.
Yeah, we start looking out into the future, and I think sometimes we make mountains out of molehills, right? Where there may be a problem that we're experiencing that needs a solution, but we blow it out of perspective because we don't put it in perspective with the grander vision, and we make a bigger deal out of it than it needs to be. And I say that sometimes. I mean, obviously, we face challenges that are pretty daunting and pretty large, but when you put it in perspective, you could see beyond the horizon the opportunity for a solution.
You got it. That is well described, and that's what happens. So, step number 1 for all of us that are listening, with any issue you have, is what is the vision? What are we trying to achieve? And I'm pretty sure as we do that, most of us have a whole new feeling about that issue. And I'm going to give you an example in a minute after I give you the 6 steps, and I think it'll help illustrate it. The second step is once you identify what the vision is, what's the current reality? And so this is just like being a fly on the wall. And if there is a gap between what you see as the vision and what the current reality is, then you go through the 6 steps, the whole process. And so I'll just quickly go through the next 4, and then I'll give you an example. Would that be okay?
Yeah, that sounds like a great plan.
Once you say, okay, there is a gap, I need to go on. Step 3 is, what is the real cause? And we recommend that you go through, just like the Toyota way, and ask why at least 5 times and really get down to the nubbins. What's the real cause? Because if we don't identify the real cause of the problem, we're going to solve the wrong problem, and we'll waste a lot of time. We may not solve it in the first place and end up back where we started and more frustrated.
And I think people like to hang out in this area. By not going deep enough, there's safety. And so they feel like if we just hang out up here at the surface level, maybe we can deal with this problem. But unless we go deep, unless we really unpack and figure out what's going on, the surface level solution will only solve part of the problem. It's like pulling a weed out without getting the roots.
Wow, well done. Jake, you're hired.
I'm hot today. How about it?
Man. Good. Okay, now, once you've got the real cause, and I might just say, that you can do this 6-step process both with problems, but also to develop an opportunity. And one of the things we found is if you're developing an opportunity, there may not be a real cause that you have to identify. You can move right on to step 4. And step 4 is, I think, the most fun, and that is, what are options? What are the alternatives that we have? And you just brainstorm. And first of all, you try to get as many as you can. You're going for quantity, not quality at first. And then once you have a great list, and if you're doing this with a team, it's fun. And really the purpose, by the way, ultimately is not only practice it ourselves, but to teach our teammates to practice it. And what we found is many of our clients now have team leaders bringing to the boss solutions rather than problems right from the get-go.
Which I think is when you start to identify a highly functioning team. If you're the boss and every problem is brought to you, it weighs on you. It wears you out, and you don't have time for strategy and moving forward. However, if your team is now bringing to you solutions, then you could spend your other energy creating new opportunities and expanding growth of the organization and the company.
That is well said. And that's just what happens. That's the real purpose, is really to produce these high performance type teams. Well, so when you're done with number 4, and you've got all of these ideas out, then just narrow them down to your few best ideas, and that takes you to step 5, which is to implement your plan. So at the end of 4, if you really pause and say, am I a go or a no-go with these possible solutions? And if it's a go, then you go on to step 5, which is implement it. And the very heart of that, and this is the whole reason for doing it, is who is going to do what, when. So the whole purpose by the time you come out of the other end of the 6 steps is you have a clearly defined plan of action. And you're going to go forward and you're going to do something. It may work or it may not work, but this is your best shot at it. And maybe you go through the 6 steps 2 or 3 times trying to perfect it, but certainly you're going to get to a better place. So that's it. You could introduce a red team at this point. A red team is now you have a plan, you present it to them. It's a set of outsiders that haven't been involved in going through this process, and their job is to just say, have you considered this? Have you considered this? It actually comes from the Pentagon, where they do war planning. They'll come up with a war plan, and then they'll invite a red team to come in and offer suggestions, weak points. Have you thought of this? What if you did this? They leave, and then, at least in the Pentagon, they finalize their plan. It's in place. Well, we can do the same thing by getting some outside eyes on our plan And then if you're in an organization, you can turn it into a very brief executive paper, like one sheet, just outlining the 6 steps. And here's our proposal. And then step 6 is to evaluate the results. How did we do on the process? What kind of result did this produce? And does it match step 1, which is the vision? And if it does, you've really made some great progress. And if you still haven't solved the problem, you can just go through the steps again until you have it. So those are the 6 steps. Here's a very brief example that I think can help teach it.
Wonderful. Let's hear it.
Okay, a friend of mine whose name is Jay Carlson, and what we did in the book, The Transformation Challenge, is we took 5 real-life examples to illustrate the application of these 6 steps. And I'll share one of them, and this has to do with a friend of mine. His name is Jay Call. Jay loved flying, and so he formed a company called Flying J.
I've heard of it.
Yes, amen, that's right. When he was a young man, his father had some gas stations, so Jay's inspiration was to start developing truck stops, the Flying J truck stops. Well, in about 2003, I think it was, Jay was, who loved flying jets, was flying one of his senior executives who had been fighting cancer to Sun Valley. And he and his wife were in the plane along with Jay, and something happened and the plane went down. Unfortunately, there were no survivors. His daughter, Crystal, along with another son, were the majority shareholders in Flying J, and very quickly she became the CEO, the president of the company. And within just a couple of weeks, one day her CFO came in and said, Crystal, we need to come up with $400 million in 4 weeks, or we are going to lose the company.
And so before we go on further with this story, let's just stop and set the stage here for a minute. Not that the stage needs any more setting, but think about the high stakes problem that we have here. It's a financial problem. It's an emotional problem. It's an abrupt problem that happened out of nowhere without any, idea that this was going to happen. So here we are in a situation that's very, very high stakes, big problem at a corporate level. All right, Steve, go ahead.
Well, no, thanks, Jake. That's exactly right. I mean, Flying J at the time was the 17th largest private organization company in the United States, $17 billion a year. And so you were spot on. There's thousands of employees. The stakes are huge. Crystal said, I immediately was depressed, discouraged. She said, I just went home, crawled in my bed in the fetal position. And I mean, she is
understandable, right?
Yeah. What are you going to do? And she's magnificent. I just love Crystal, and anybody that knows her feels the same way. Well, she woke up within a couple of days, and she's got a fighting spirit, and she applied the principles of the 6 steps. And what the very first thing she did is she shifted the problem to the vision. And the vision was save the company. She said, as soon as that idea got in my mind, I was filled with energy and purpose. She said, as I shared it with the other executives, it changed everything. We looked at the current reality, and we needed to come up with $400 million. That's step 2. The banks were starting to call the loans. All of our lines of credits were tapped out, and we just we didn't have access to cash. So they went to step 3. There was a big gap between save the company and what the current reality was. And so they had to get to the real problem. As they went down through this chain of whys, they realized one of the reasons was that they had purchased a petroleum processing plant down in the desert in Southern California. They paid $350 million for it, and they're going to have to pay another $150 million to remodel it. It was an older plant, and so that's one of the whys. They went deeper. They said, well, we just purchased a pipeline to bring oil up from the Gulf to Dallas so that we had better control of our supply. That cost us $300 million, and we have $800 million worth of oil in the pipeline. And it just happened at about that time, gas prices plummeted, and the price of oil that they purchased went to half. And so the value of that oil was half of what it was previously. They looked around also and they said another current reality is our core business, Flying J truck stops, are doing very well. And so there they had it. They knew they had the problem. So they went on to step 4, which is what are our options? Crystal got her executive team in a Saturday morning in an off-site at a hotel. In the conference room, they all got in. She turned around and locked the door. She said, we're not leaving today until we figure out a way. And what was the vision?
Save the company.
Save the company. We're not leaving until we have a plan. And so they came up with a list of about 30 things. And then they went through and they said, these are the best 15. One of those happened to be for the file for Chapter 11 reorganization so that they could have a little time and space to be able to work their plan. Another was to sell the refinery. Another is sell the pipeline within 10 months, both of those. Another was to see if they could find somebody to do a joint venture with to get more cash. And so that was it. They set up the plan. Step 5 was who was going to do what, when. All of the assignments were made. She unlocked the door and out they went. They went to work on that plan. Well, here's what happened. Step 6, they evaluated it. They did file for Chapter 11 within 1 week. They got the protection they needed. Now they could operate under a court-supervised plan. They sold the refinery within 8 months. They sold the pipeline within 8 months. They also found a great partner in Pilot truck stops. And if you look closely at the brand today, it is Pilot Flying J truck stops. And so that's it. 18 months later, within a year and a half of doing that, they came out of bankruptcy and they paid off every single creditor 100%, penny, dollar for dollar. So they got all of their money. And that's the story of applying the 6 steps. Today, Chuck, her husband, and Crystal have invested in a new group of service stations called Maverick Stations.
Which I love the Maverick Stations. They are popping up all over out here in the West. And, this is a tremendous story. And Steve, what I want to say for the group here is when you pick up a copy of the book, this is what you're going to get. You're going to be able to deep dive into some of these stories and see the application of these 6 steps. And boy, I tell you, we all face challenges. We all have obstacles that we need to overcome. But when you find yourself as the brand new owner of a company that's $400 million in debt, creditors calling your bills, you're really operating at a high stakes challenge here. If it can work at that level, just think what it can do at your level. And so that's a great conversation, Steve. I really appreciate diving into that. I look at our time and we're a little bit short on time. So before I let you go, I want to ask you a few questions to add a little personal to this business conversation we've been having. Learning from leaders. How does that sound?
Okay, great. It's been so fun being with you, Jake.
We could go on for hours, you and I, but some of the listeners, they need to go into work. They're waiting for us.
Right, sounds good.
All right, how about taking a look at your bookshelf or your bedside table or your Kindle? What are you reading these days?
Okay, a couple of that I've really enjoyed recently. One is written by Richard and Linda Eyre, and it is entitled Life in Full, Maximizing Your Longevity and Legacy. And it's just talking about how, especially that the new 80-year-old people is 60. In other words, we have a whole new vitality we didn't have before, and we're able to live a lot longer. And so what does that look like? Life in Full. That's one. Another one is called Positive In by Joe Morton. Really fun book. 5 simple actions to eliminate the negative and embrace the positive. Fun.
Well, I've got those written down, and I got to tell you, Richard and Linda Eyre are 2 of my favorites. They do some tremendous work, so I second that recommendation. How about your leadership superpower?
Well, I'm biased, okay? Not a fair question, but I really got to say, becoming your best, the 12 principles, that does it. People don't need to go out and do all the work themselves or recreate the wheel. We've done a lot of research, and if they follow those things, that is a superpower.
And then before we let you go, any last-minute advice, motivational quote or mantra, some philosophy that you live by? And then why don't you give us a way that we can connect with you and pick up your book?
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, one of my favorite quotes by Ralph Waldo Emerson is, sow a thought and you reap an action. Sow an act and you reap a habit. Sow a habit and you reap a character, and sow a character and you reap a destiny. But it all starts with our thoughts and putting the right things in our minds, and then everything else flows from that. So we want to be really careful about what we're reading and who we're associating with, so that we're heading in the right direction.
And then how can we connect with you?
And then as far as that, you can go to becomingyourbest.com. Also, if you would like, one of the real fun things we have in the book, one of the 12 principles, is something called the Circle of Peace and Balance. It's a personal assessment that you can take on how you're doing. Are you living a balanced life? And if your listeners would like to just write an email to us, it's support@becomingyourbest.com. We'd be happy to just send along a free PDF of that. It's fun to take, and then you can take corrective answer. But that's it, Jake.
Well, and I'm going to link all this up on the show notes for this page, for this episode, so that the listeners can just go there. And I really recommend that they go and get this assessment. The more we can learn about ourselves and the vision that we have moving forward, the more that we can implement and have success. Steve, I can't thank you enough for sharing your expertise with the Modern Leadership audience today.
Well, congratulations on what you're doing. You really are making a difference, and thank you for your time. Like I said at the beginning, it's really been an honor to be with you.
Well, is it just me, or are these interviews getting more and more fascinating? These guests are coming to us week after week with just some of the most incredible stories and backgrounds. They're spending their lives dedicated to building businesses and finding success, finding what really works in their lives and in their families. Can't thank Steve enough for coming on the show. After we hung up and turned off the recording, we chatted a little bit, and I'm going to head up there and have breakfast with him. He's going to treat me to breakfast. Looking forward to really power breakfasting with a man who has spent his entire life and career focused on leadership, on transformation, on problem solving, and on really building a successful life. And so I highly recommend to you to find those people in your life that you can sit down and learn from. There's so much opportunity out there, so much ability to grow and to change your life and the world, that we need to really be proactive to go out there and harness it and seek after it. Of course, everything that we talked about on this episode can be found on the show notes, which are found at jakeacarlson.com/ML71. That stands for Modern Leadership 71, ML71. And until next week, I want to challenge you to go out there and find people to be around that are raising your game, that are challenging you to go to the next level. Make it a great life. This is the only one you got. Stay awesome. Thanks for listening to the Modern Leadership Podcast. You can find me on Facebook at Speaker Jake, on Twitter at Jake A. Carlson, and of course the website, jakeacarlson.com. See you there.